Hey, thou art that. I just wanted to talk to you about your idea of the other person's idea about the brain being a computer. It is a computer, and it has been proven scientifically. I'm reading a book right now called Blink, the Power of Thinking Without Thinking, and it explains how our brain makes decisions for us before we're even conscious of it. And it's called our adaptive unconscious. And they proved this thing called the adaptive unconscious and how it regulates our behavior before we're consciously aware of thinking through a series of tests that involve something called priming. And priming is when you give a group of people a paragraph and it's sprinkled with certain words, adverbs, nouns, commands, that actually suggest to them in a subconscious way what their behavior should be. And this is a very interesting study. There were two groups. The first was sprinkled with words like aggressively, bold, rude, bother, disturb, intrude, and infringe. The second group was sprinkled with words like respect, considerate, appreciate, patiently, yield, polite, and courteous. Now what's interesting is the first group and the second group, within the next 20 minutes of the experiment, would act very different. Each member that had read the paragraph was asked to go to a professor and speak to him. Now, everybody in the first group that read the words that were sort of intrusive in nature, they got stuck behind a professor and somebody the professor hired that they didn't know that he hired, and this person blocked the door and constantly was complaining to the professor about her grades, and she just would not stop, and she would go on and on and on for minutes. And every single member of the first group who had read the aggressive paragraph interrupted this girl and wanted to talk to the professor. They interrupted many, many times. And interestingly enough, the second group that was given passive words when they went to the professor, they just sat quietly and listened to the girl talk. Not one of them interrupted. And this experiment has been done over and over and over again. And it shows that people can be primed into certain behaviors subconsciously. And so the people, when they read the paragraph, they didn't notice it was sprinkled with certain words, and they didn't even know it was connected with the girl that was blocking them to talk to the professor. So that just shows the way our subconscious mind computates words and changes our behavior before we even realize it. As a matter of fact, they kind of describe it as our adaptive unconscious. They describe it. The giant computer that is our unconscious silently crunches all the data it can from experiences we've had, the people we've met, the lessons we've learned, the books we've read, the movies we've seen, and so on, and it forms an opinion. That's what is coming out of this information. And the information gets even more interesting. There is something called an IAT, Implicit Association Test. And what it does is it first asks you what your political beliefs are, what your beliefs on race are, what your beliefs on women are. And then it asks you to place your left hand on the letter E and the right hand on the letter I. And it asks you to associate as quickly as you can, in the left column good, the right column being bad, what certain words are, like government, or liberal, or this, or that. And it does it in a very complicated way. And you can take this test yourself at www.implicit.harvard.edu, and what they find is that people claim to be a certain ideology, but when they take the test, they find that their associations that they make are often different from what they believe their ideology is. For instance, a person might believe that they have a strong belief in community and liberalism. Yet when they take the test, they find that they have negative associations with community and things like that. So what we are consciously telling ourselves is not always what's subconsciously going on in our heads. And that means that our brain is constantly computating what's going on And then that informs our conscious what to do. So it's not like our conscious is just this thing set apart from everything else that works perfectly, just because we want it to, because we will to. It works because there are all these mechanisms in place that have been put there by evolution. And also earlier you mentioned in your video that you mentioned that external information versus internal information, like the information in our brain and information, the one you say, oh, that has to be one kind of information. I don't think that's true. I think that once the external information gets received by our brain, it becomes interpreted in ways that we can understand. So there's a difference between the pure information that's in the world and the interpreted information that's in our brain, and it's organized in ways that we can understand. Also, you mentioned that all the cells in our body replace themselves within 6 months. Well, our brain works so that it works like a neural network. Neurons connect synapses, send electrical currents, and we make connections and associations, and it just constantly goes out, and leaves memories behind, so that when we get to the present situation, we have an identity. So although those cells are replacing, the neurons are still connecting, and they're leaving a trail behind of what has happened to us, and that gives us a sense of identity that is constant. And in that way, I guess you could say identity is computational, because identity is dependent upon memory, and memory is dependent upon the very physical action of our neurons connecting with one another. It's not to say that, I just made an argument a while back arguing for the soul, but I still do think that there's a part of our brain that works very much like hardware, and I think that these studies of priming, of adaptive unconscious, and of IAT, Implicit Association Test, prove that. If you want to take the Implicit Association Test, you can go to www.implicit.harvard.edu. It's a very interesting test to take, and they actually take the information that you bring in, they use it in their research. So anyway, thanks for listening.